The Alpha King lies sprawled across the cold marble floor, and 4 women stand over him. 3 watch him struggle. 1 kneels. If you were chosen as his bride, what would you do when your king falls helpless before you? Step back and protect your pride? Or step forward and protect the man? This moment demands an answer, and reveals one's soul more honestly than any vow ever could. Later that same night, whispers slash through the palace corridors. A queen tried to poison the crippled Alpha. The wives tremble. The palace trembles. The guards stand ready for blood. But Kaelin does not rage. He does not demand punishment. He simply asks each wife one question. If your survival required another's suffering, would you accept the cost? Some justify betrayal. Some lie. Some crumble under guilt. But Elara, the healer with the soft hands and the wildfire spirit, gives an answer that stuns even the hidden Alpha King. An answer that does not save her, but saves him. The grand hall fell silent as Elara crossed the threshold, her borrowed slippers whispering against marble so polished it reflected the vaulted ceiling above. 4 women stood at varying distances from the dais where Lord Kaelin sat hunched in his wheeled chair, each face a study in controlled contempt. Before we dive in this story, please subscribe and hit the like button. I have another interesting story for you tomorrow. You wouldn't like to miss it. The nearest was Seraphine, draped in crimson silk that made her pale skin luminous. Her lips curved in something that might have been a smile on a kinder face. So this is the hedge which they've brought to complete the set. I'm a healer, Elara said quietly, meeting her gaze. From Thornwood. How rustic. The second wife, Lysandra, adjusted the cascade of sapphire necklaces at her throat. Her beauty was the calculated kind, every hair arranged, every gesture practiced. I do hope you won't track mud through the corridors. The third wife said nothing, only assessed Elara with eyes like chips of amber. Morgana was younger than the others, perhaps only 20, but carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd learned early that survival meant watching, waiting, striking only when certain of victory. The fourth wife wasn't present. Vivian prefers the eastern wing, Seraphine offered, following Elara's glance. She finds the rest of us tedious. From his chair, Kaelin coughed, a wet, rattling sound that should have drawn attention. None of the wives moved. Elara started forward instinctively before catching herself, remembering her place, or lack of it. My lord, she said, approaching the dais. Shall I fetch your physician? I have no need of physicians. His voice was threadbare, barely audible. Just water. The wives exchanged glances. Seraphine examined her rings. Lysandra suddenly discovered something fascinating about the tapestry on the far wall. Morgana simply turned away. Elara found a crystal decanter on a side table and poured a glass, bringing it to Kaelin's trembling hands. His fingers brushed hers, warmer than she expected, stronger, before he took the glass and drank with exaggerated difficulty. Thank you, he whispered. Of course. The other wives drifted toward the door like autumn leaves, already dismissing her from their concerns. Only Morgana paused, looking back with an expression Elara couldn't quite read. Warning? Curiosity? Then they were gone, and she was alone with her husband who wasn't quite her husband, in a castle that felt less like a home than a carefully constructed trap. The days that followed revealed a pattern. Kaelin moved through the manor with the uncertain shuffle of the infirm, always attended by servants who seemed more decoration than aid. But Elara noticed things. The way his hands never quite shook when he thought no one watched. How his breath came easier when he believed himself alone. The sharp intelligence that occasionally broke through the clouded gaze he showed the world. On the third day, he dropped a scroll in the library while all 4 wives happened to be present, an unusual occurrence, as they typically avoided gathering together. The parchment rolled across the floor towards Seraphine's feet. She stepped over it without breaking stride in her conversation with Lysandra about the upcoming harvest festival. The scroll continued its lazy trajectory toward Morgana, who'd been studying a leather-bound tome. She glanced down, then deliberately shifted her chair to block its path, returning to her book as though nothing had happened. Only when it reached Elara did anyone move. She bent, retrieved it, brought it to Kaelin. "Your correspondence, my lord." His fingers closed over it, and for just a moment, his eyes cleared. Really looked at her. Then the fog returned, and he mumbled something about taxation records and northern trade routes. 2 days later, he knocked over his tonic during the evening meal, a massive table where the wives sat in their designated places like chess pieces on a board. The green liquid spread across white linen, dripping toward the edge. Vivian, attending for once, watched it pool near her plate and called for servants with a voice like cut glass. Lysandra pushed her chair back to avoid the spreading stain. Morgana said nothing, merely relocated to a different seat. Elara grabbed a napkin and began soaking up the liquid before it could reach the floor, ignoring the sticky sweetness coating her hands. "Leave it," Seraphine said sharply. "That's what the servants are for. It's no trouble." Elara continued working, aware of Kaelin's gaze on her bent head. The servants arrived, and she stepped back, but not before catching the flicker of something in her husband's expression. Calculation. Satisfaction. As though she'd confirmed a hypothesis he'd been testing. The pattern repeated. A fallen cane in the garden, which Elara retrieved while Vivian pretended not to notice, deep in conversation with the head gardener. A request for assistance reading fine print that Lysandra claimed hurt her eyes too much to help with, but which Elara read aloud without hesitation. Small moments, insignificant on their own, but accumulating weight. What disturbed her more was how the other wives treated the servants. Morgana's cold dismissals. Seraphine's cutting remarks disguised as just. Lysandra's habit of summoning attendants and then forgetting she'd called anyone, leaving maids standing for hours. Vivian's casual cruelty, delivered with such elegant diction it took a moment to register as cruelty at all. Elara helped where she could. Carried heavy linens when she found a maid struggling. Treated a kitchen boy's burned hand. Thanked people by name. And Kaelin watched. Always watched. On the 7th night, Elara woke to voices drifting through the ventilation grates connecting the manor's rooms, an architectural quirk of the old fortress foundations. She pressed her ear to the ornate metalwork and listened. "She's insufferable." Seraphine's voice, sharp with venom. "All that false sweetness, helping servants like she's one of them." "She's gathering allies," Morgana said quietly. "Building loyalty." "To what end?" Lysandra's laugh was brittle. "She has no power here. None of us do. Yet." Vivian's contribution was almost too soft to hear. "But when he dies." "If he dies," Morgana corrected. "He's been dying for 5 years. I'm beginning to think the old monster will outlive us all." Silence. Heavy, weighted with unspoken truths. "The Northern Bride is the variable," Vivian continued. "We need to know her intentions before the lunar festival. Before the contracts renew. Or eliminate the variable entirely." Elara's breath caught. She waited for protest, for someone to reject such a suggestion. The silence stretched. Then Seraphine laughed. "How dramatic. Let's simply make her life so miserable she leaves on her own. So much cleaner." The voices faded as the women dispersed, but Elara remained frozen against the grate, heart hammering. She'd known the welcome was cold, but this was something else. Coordination. Strategy. Survival. She was still sitting there when dawn light crept through her window, painting the stone walls gold. And somewhere in the manor, she knew, Kaelin wasn't sleeping either. Knew he was watching, waiting, testing. What she didn't know was why she sometimes felt like the test subject, and sometimes like she was being recruited to help him with an experiment she didn't yet understand. That night, as moonlight flooded through her window, Elara thought she saw a shadow pass in the garden below. Tall, powerfully built, moving with a predator's fluid grace that had nothing to do with illness or age. She blinked, and it was gone. But on the windowsill, she found a single black feather, placement too deliberate to be accidental. A message. Or a warning. Either way, someone was paying very close attention. The jeweled dagger disappeared on a morning when frost still clung to the manor's windows, turning glass into fields of crystallized light. Elara first heard of it when servants began whispering in corners, their usual efficiency replaced by nervous glances and hushed conversations that died the moment any wife appeared. By midday, the entire household had been summoned to the Great Hall. Lord Kalen sat in his wheeled chair at the head of the room, advisors flanking him like vultures. Chief among them was Aldrich, a man whose face seemed incapable of expressing anything but professional disapproval. The four wives arranged themselves in a semicircle, while servants lined the walls in rigid silence. At the center of it all stood a boy. Couldn't have been more than 12, thin as a birch sapling, with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. His name was Tomlin, Elara remembered. She'd treated his sister's fever 2 days ago. The dagger, Aldrich announced in a voice that carried to every corner, bore the royal seal. Its theft is not merely crime but treason. Tomlin's face had gone the color of new snow. My lord, Aldrich continued, turning to Kalen with elaborate deference, the boy was seen near your chambers this morning. He has no alibi, no witnesses to place him elsewhere. The evidence is compelling. Kalen said nothing, only watched with those clouded eyes that saw more than they should. Before anyone could respond, Aldrich moved among the wives, speaking in tones meant to seem private but perfectly audible to anyone paying attention. Elara watched him bend near Seraphine, whisper something that made her eyes sharpen with interest. Then to Lysandra, whose expression shifted from boredom to calculation. Morgana received her message with a slight nod. Vivian's lips curved into something that might have been pleasure or might have been contempt, difficult to distinguish on her aristocratic features. Well, Aldrich straightened, addressing the room at large. Who among you can speak to this matter? Seraphine stepped forward first, silk rustling. I saw the boy loitering near the Lord's quarters. His behavior was suspicious. I noticed him as well, Lysandra added smoothly. Moving with unusual stealth for someone engaged in honest work. Morgana's contribution was quieter but no less damning. He asked questions about the Lord's schedule, about when chambers would be unattended. Vivian simply said, guilty, as though rendering judgment on inferior wine. The guards moved toward Tomlin, who'd begun to shake so violently his teeth chattered. One guard's hand went to the sword at his hip, not to draw it, not yet, but the threat was clear enough. Wait. Elara's voice cut through the hall like a bell through fog. Every head turned. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. Lysandra's mouth compressed into a thin line. Morgana looked almost curious. Vivian appeared faintly amused, as though Elara had just volunteered for some entertaining humiliation. Elara stepped forward until she stood between the guards and the boy. You have something to add? Aldrich's tone suggested she should reconsider. I do. She kept her voice steady despite the acceleration of her pulse. Where's this evidence? Has the dagger been found in his possession? Has anyone actually seen him take it? The circumstantial evidence is sufficient, Aldrich replied. Circumstantial evidence of what? Being in the wrong place? Asking questions. She looked at each wife in turn. You've condemned him on suspicion alone. The boy is guilty, Seraphine said flatly. Everyone can see it. I see a child who's terrified. That's not the same thing. The guard captain, a scarred veteran named Rothgar, stepped closer. His hand now fully gripped his sword hilt. Step aside, my lady. This doesn't concern you. It concerns anyone with a conscience. Behind her, Tomlin made a small sound, half sob, half gasp. His fear was palpable, filling the air like smoke. Lady Elara. Aldrich's voice carried a warning now. You overstep. The Lord's advisors have made their recommendation. The other wives have given testimony. Your compassion is noted, but justice must be served. This isn't justice. This is convenience. She stood straighter, though the guard captain towered over her. You want someone to blame, so you've chosen the most powerless person in this room. Someone who can't defend himself. Can you prove his innocence? Vivian asked, and for once there was genuine interest in her voice. Can any of you prove his guilt? Elara shot back. Beyond whispers and suspicious glances? Silence fell, thick and heavy. Then Rothgar drew his blade. Not fully, just enough that steel sang against the scabbard, a sound that promised violence. Final warning, my lady. Step aside. Elara looked at the sword. At the boy behind her. At the wives who'd already decided someone else's fate to secure their own standing. No. The word dropped like a stone into still water. If you punish him for a lie, she said quietly, punish me too. If he's guilty of theft, then I'm guilty of harboring him. If he's guilty of treason, then I'm a traitor. Whatever sentence you pass on him, you'll have to pass on me first. Hrothgar hesitated. Behind him, Aldrich's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise or might have been respect. The other wives stared as though Elara had suddenly begun speaking in tongues. Behind a curtain to the left of the dais, hidden in shadow, Kaelin's hands tightened on the arms of a chair that wasn't wheeled, wasn't weak, that bore the weight of a body far stronger than the one he showed the world. His chest felt strange, tight, and loose simultaneously, as though something that had been carefully sealed had suddenly cracked open. He'd staged this. Planted the dagger in his own chambers, had Aldrich spread rumors, instructed his advisors to hint that accusing the boy would earn favor with the mysterious Alpha King who never appeared but whose judgment supposedly governed everything. He'd wanted to see what each wife would do when presented with an easy path to advancement at someone else's expense. For wives had taken it without hesitation. One had stepped between a blade and a child. He'd expected mercy, perhaps. Compassion. Elara had already demonstrated both. But this was something else entirely. This was someone willing to shoulder another's punishment, to make herself the target, to risk everything for a principle she couldn't even be certain was correct. This was unshakable. Hrothgar. Kaelin's voice emerged from the shadows, still maintaining its threadbare quality, but carrying unmistakable authority. Stand down. The guard captain stepped back immediately, sword sliding home. The dagger, Kaelin continued, has been found. In my study. Where I left it. The boy is innocent. The words fell into the hall like judgment themselves. Seraphine's face went carefully blank. Lysandra suddenly found the floor fascinating. Morgana's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Vivian simply turned and walked away, as though the entire affair had already ceased to interest her. Aldrich dismissed the assembly with a wave, servants scattering like startled birds. The wives departed in rustle of silk and whisper of slippers. Only Elara remained, kneeling beside Tomlin, whose tears had finally broken free now that the danger had passed. You're safe, she murmured, checking his wrists where the guards had grabbed him, finding the beginnings of bruises. I'm sorry you were frightened. Why did you help me? His voice cracked on the question. Because it was right. Such a simple answer. As though the world could really be that uncomplicated. From behind the curtain, Kaelin watched her produce a small tin of salve. She carried healing supplies everywhere. He'd noticed, and tend to bruises that were nothing compared to the emotional wounds that had been inflicted. Watched her speak softly until the boy's breathing steadied. Watched her walk him to the door and release him with gentle instructions to rest. Only when the hall was truly empty did Kaelin emerge from his hiding place, moving with the fluid grace his condition would never permit. He stood at the spot where she'd positioned herself between sword and child, and felt that strange sensation in his chest intensify. She was nothing like the others. And that, he realized with something approaching alarm, made her infinitely more dangerous than any of them. The fever came with the spring rains, creeping through the east wing like smoke through cracks. It started with a guard named Gareth, a veteran who'd served the manor for 20 years, who collapsed during morning rounds with skin hot enough to scald and eyes that couldn't focus on anything in this world. By evening, 2 more had fallen. By the next dawn, 5. The royal healer, Master Corvus, arrived in a cloud of acrid herbs and professional pessimism. He examined the afflicted in their quarantined rooms, lips pressed into a bloodless line, before summoning the household's ranking members to the council chamber. Elara entered to find the other wives already seated, maintaining careful distance from one another as though proximity itself might prove contagious. Lord Kaelin occupied his usual chair, attended by Aldrich, whose expression suggested he'd already calculated acceptable losses. The fever is unlike anything in my texts, Corvus announced without preamble. He was a man who treated conversation like surgery, quick, precise, devoid of comfort. It spreads through breath and touch. Left unchecked, it will consume the entire household within a fortnight. Can you stop it? Lysandra asked, one hand pressed protectively against her throat. Possibly. Corvus set a leather journal on the table, its pages marked with grim sketches of symptoms. There exists a cure. Ancient. Dangerous. But effective. Then brew it, Seraphine said impatiently. The primary ingredient requires a living source. His pause was deliberate, theatrical. Blood and marrow from an infected host. Extracted while the fever is strongest. The process would be fatal to the donor. The words settled over the room like frost. You're asking us to kill someone to save the others, Morgana said quietly. I'm asking you to make a practical choice. One life for many. Gareth was the first infected. His fever is most advanced, which makes him ideal. He's also older, his service years largely behind him. From a utilitarian perspective, do it. Vivian's voice was ice over steel. Brew your cure. Seraphine nodded. Better one than dozens. Lysandra twisted her rings, but voiced no objection. If it's truly the only way. Morgana remained silent, which Corvus appeared to interpret as assent. He turned to Lord Kalen.